Good morning. Good morning. My name is Monique Boulay. I am the CEO of the Acadiana Planning Commission. I want to welcome you here today to Acadiana, to the Light Center, to the university, and to Lafayette. It's very exciting what we have going on. I first want to tell you a little bit about APC. The Acadiana Planning Commission is made up of the parish presidents from 7 Acadiana parishes: Acadia, Evangeline, Iberia, Lafayette, St. Landry, St. Martin, and Vermilion parishes. And I do have some of my board members here today, but I need to thank all of them. They let us be creative, they let us take risks, they let us think big. And that's what this is. We've been having this conversation at the board level for about a year now. And I want to thank them. Larry Richard from Iberia is over here. Thank you, Larry. One of our board members is on the agenda, Joel Robideau. He is a CPA, and he's all over this stuff. So he'll be here a little bit later. But just for you to know a little bit of who we are. I want to thank our co-sponsors. We work a lot with federal agencies, but never with FDIC and never with the Office of the Comptroller. So this is a new partnership. They bring a whole new crowd to the table. So we're excited to work with them. We want to thank them for all of their efforts. There's 3 takeaways, I guess, that I'd like for everybody to have with you by the end of the day. One, we have some really dynamic speakers who are going to, I think, educate all of us and give us a strong foundation of what this legislation gives us the opportunity, and I'm trying not to use that word too much, but it will set up those designated census tracts in a way that we haven't seen in this country, I believe. And so I think they will give us a foundation of information and knowledge to grow from and to work from. And take it all in, ask as many questions as you can. Many of our speakers are from D.C. They won't be back in the state. Of course, we do have their contact information, but it is an opportunity to really engage with them and to bring our questions and our, the logistics. They have about as much expertise as you can have prior to the formal rules being released. And so utilize them, talk to them, and ask questions. We do have questions, Q&A built into each of the panel sessions. And we also want your input following this. The second takeaway is that we need to mobilize our communities to help set visions and identify those 2 or 3 or 4 key projects that can happen, whether it's Breaux Bridge or Ville Platte or downtown Lafayette or the Oil Center, that can really be game changers to bring new life, new energy, and revitalize our towns. That is the underlying objective of all of this. And so creating that vision with those communities is a huge opportunity. The third takeaway would be the opportunity to mobilize local investors and then prepare our communities to welcome a national viewing from a financial perspective. Building capacities and digging from our plans. We have master plans and comprehensive plans all over the region. Pulling those out and really identifying what will get buy-in from our communities and what will we see all the way through for a 10-year period into success. And then the fourth takeaway is Acadiana really is at the forefront of this. We feel like we've had a fire hose in our face for a year, but as these rules are released, I think we're going to be ready to move fairly quickly and get out in front of the conversation. Because of our regional strategy, which we'll go into a little bit later, we're already being asked to talk and to participate in national conversations. So it'll be good for those projects that we identify. We'll be able to throw them out there as well and really get some good attention. So those are the 4 things I want to mention. And thank you. Work with us. We have a big crowd here today. We have overflow rooms. We're going to be going back and forth, trying to take questions from there as well. So sit back, enjoy the food. And I'm going to introduce Scarlett Duplichan. She's going to come up. She is one of our sponsoring partners, and let her talk to you.
All right, thank you, Monique, and good morning. I can't say that I've ever been in a room this full of people when we were talking about IRS and taxes. You know? So, again, thank you so much for joining us. As Monique said, I'm Scarlett Dupla-Shannon. I'm with the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the OCC, and of course we regulate and supervise national banks and thrifts. And I want to thank all of the national banks and thrifts who thought enough to join us this morning for such an important topic. I want to also take the time to make you aware of two of my colleagues from the OCC. We have David Black, who you'll hear from in just a few minutes, and then we have Paula Murrell, who is a bank examiner out of our Longview field office. And so they will be with us for the entire day. I want to also take a moment to talk about a few housekeeping issues. Of course, cell phone courtesy. Please put your cell phones on vibrate, mute, something, because the event is going to be recorded and live streamed, and we want to try and limit as much interference as we possibly can. Also, Monique kind of referenced the fact that we will be taking questions at the end of each panel, and we ask that, because we don't have mics to go around the room, we ask that you use the cards that are in your folder. You should have some comment cards, and we can get you more if you have more than enough, one question, of course. But that's how we will collect them at the end of each presentation. Lunch is going to be served. It will be a box lunch, and we'll take a break for that, but it is a working lunch. We have speakers, and so we ask that you get your lunch and then come back. And let's see, future viewing, I think, understanding that, remember, we are being recorded, so you know, if you don't want everybody else to see what you're doing, don't do it. Okay? So, and then very last, we have a resource table, but we have, I want to make reference to an OCC publications that we provide on our website. There are links to them for future reference. So we ask at your leisure to take a moment to look at those. So again, thank you so much for joining us. It's an exciting time, and you know, looking forward to a lot of information. So thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. And Linda, my partner in crime, Linda Gabriel from the FDIC.
Good morning. I'm going to need a little more than that from you Lafayette people and surrounding cities. It's good to be home. Thank you for coming out this morning. A full room. You're here to learn some new and exciting things that you can take back to your communities and make a difference. So we appreciate you being here. I want to thank my co-partners, the OCC and LPC, for this opportunity to work with you guys and to plan this event. It's a full day. You've already gotten the orders of what not to do. And if you shouldn't be here and you told your manager or your department head that you're in the hospital, you'll be videoed today. So make sure you work out a plan to get that done. But we're going to move right on. I want to acknowledge a couple of my partners here from the FDIC. You met Deborah Sweeney at the check-in table. We have Regina Austin, which is part of the Dallas Regional Office. And there may be some other people here that I haven't seen as they checked in. Where is he? Where? Well, all right. So, Eloy Villafranca, the Dallas Regional Office Manager. Eloy, raise your hand, everybody. See, I didn't see him come in, so thank you, Scarlett. That was a good save, so thank you. We're going to go ahead and get started with this event, and I will go ahead and introduce our next two speakers. So we have with us this morning from the OCC, Mr. David Black, comes to us from Washington, D.C., and Mr. Andrew Seth. Both of their bios are in your packet, so we won't spend time going over that. And they have some really exciting information to share with us. So help me welcome our next two presenters.
All right, good morning. Our job over the next 60 minutes or so is to introduce the topic of opportunity zones, what they are and how they work. And hopefully that will lay the foundation for the discussion throughout the rest of the morning. We're going to do this in kind of a conversational format, in part because we're learning from each other about how this works. But we really want to engage your questions as well. So please fill out the cards, bring questions. We'll take them up into the discussion. I hope you'll find this useful. By way of introduction, I am David Black. I'm a researcher within the Community Affairs Department of the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. We are the regulator of national banks and federal savings associations, and I'm based out of DC.
And I'm Andy Seth with Sustainable Strategies DC. We work with communities across the country, helping them find funding for their community revitalization needs. And opportunity zones are a big tool added to that toolbox. And as David mentioned, our job today, we're the busboys of this event. We're going to set the table. And hopefully this lays the groundwork for everything that's going to follow in the presentations after hours. So they'll go deeper into how these tools are being applied in communities across the country and how they're being leveraged with other resources. Our goal, though, is to make sure that everybody's on the same page and understands the program. So with that, and we're going to make this conversational, and please, as David mentioned, jump in with written questions if something doesn't make sense as we're walking through this.
I also want to offer a disclaimer. The Opportunity Zone program is governed by a lot of tax law. We are not tax experts. If as you begin pursuing an Opportunity Zone transaction, you would be wise to consult a tax professional with expertise in this particular program.
So excellent. So this program got started in late 2017. There was a tax bill that was moving through Congress, and there was a program, an idea that Cory Booker from New Jersey and Tim Scott from South Carolina were kicking around. A bipartisan idea to create an Opportunity Zone program. It came out of nowhere. The tax bill was on the finish line, and this got inserted to it, and it passed. So no one knew this was coming. No one was really ready for this, and we've been racing to catch up since. So it passed in late 2017 in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. We've got the slide's going to be available.
Yes, on our website.
On the website. So we've got links and such in the presentation, so if you're interested in any of these links. But the actual legislative language is that link, and you can look in, it's a super long act, but there is a few pages in there about the Opportunity Zone program.
Yeah, buried into that. A little background on the sausage making of the legislative process, because as Andy said, this really kind of came out of nowhere. Even though the bill had been really around for a couple of years as they've been kind of crafting it, but it didn't go through the normal legislative process. It went through what's called the budget reconciliation process, which is a process that's been around since 1974 to address certain tax spending and debt limit regulations. And it has its own set of rules to be able to work on this, and it will only cover certain things. So whereas the Investing in Opportunities Act, which was this standalone legislation for this, when it got inserted in there, only certain things could come through. So there's a few quirks in the law that are important to understand. One of those is the fact that there's no real reporting on the community development impacts in this any longer. The legislators that had sponsored the bill were very strong, and have recently sent a comment letter saying, we really intended for these reporting requirements to be in there, but because of the tax credit, or because of the reconciliation process, those reporting requirements were removed. Treasury is being asked now to put reporting requirements into the legislation as they're writing the legislation. So we'll see how that goes. One of the other kind of interesting elements of this is, as we'll go through the process of this, there's a hard stop of when the taxes need to be paid on the capital gains. That hard stop is in December 31, 2026. And that's going to have implications on some of the benefits. But That was inserted because of there's can be no net spending increases as a result of the bill, so that was part of the trade-offs on this. So they had to insert this. That may change later on, but right now there is a hard stop for that.
So,
The rules, I mean, the guidance on this, how's that?
so we're in a space right now, and the government shutdown certainly has delayed this a little bit, and we'll go through this a little bit, but the places are designated, but the IRS is working on guidance and finalizing guidance to make sure that everyone understands the playing field for this. So in late December, comments were due on some guidance that they put out in October, I believe.
Right.
And if you had questions, concerns, and like all tax legislation, it is succinct, and there are more questions than answers in the legislation itself. There were a lot of questions on how this would bump up against other programs. Did it apply to this, that, or the other? So there was a lot of feedback going into IRS. What they're working on now on February 14th, Valentine's Day. They are doing a public hearing in DC. They're going to be talking about some of the comments that have come in, and they're going to work to finalize that guidance. So the playing field will be largely established. And what we're hearing is that they're likely not going to tackle everything, that there might be more guidance coming out as more questions emerge. So there'll be enough to start your investing, to start pulling this equity into your projects. So don't let any lack of 100% clarity slow you down. It's time to get started. And this is an amazing event. I work with communities across the country, and all communities should be doing events like this to get ready for this. So the fact that you're doing this here really will put you on the forefront of taking advantage of a program like this. So congrats to you.
I just want to say Valentine's Day at the IRS. Can you feel the love?
So let's talk about the program itself, just so that everyone understands what's going on with Opportunity Zones. The idea was they wanted to encourage long-term private sector equity investment in projects. And the goal was that, during the recession, a lot of places suffered, but there were a lot of places out in the country that when the recovery came, the recovery didn't come to these places. And they were slow to see the investment that other places did. So what the senators and the team wanted to see is a little incentive in those census tracts that needed more help to get back on a path to recovery. So that is the goal, and the incentive is a couple of things, and we'll walk through this in just a second. But it's deferrals on capital gains. It is tax exclusion if you're putting your money into an Opportunity Zone project. And the outcome is what we hope you'll see in places all across the country. Private sector getting interested in projects in places that were largely overlooked for too long.
Yeah. For those of you who have been in the community development business for a while, I think for a lot of us, at least for me anyway, my initial frame of reference for this was a lot of the community development tax credits that are out there, the historic tax credits, the market tax credits, and the low-income housing tax credits. This is a very different program for that, and it's different in a number of important ways. One, it's important to understand this is equity. It's not, these are not loans, this is equity into the projects. You used the term long-term. Long-term is, of course, a very relative term, and it depends upon the asset and what you're doing. Just for comparison, so the timeline for the maximum benefits for the opportunity funds are 10 years, at least 10 years. In comparison, the historic tax credit is 5 years, new market tax credits is 7 years, and the housing credits are 15 years. So it's a little longer than most, but not as long as all of them. It's important to understand, though, that those benefits that you're getting are for timeline that's in an opportunity fund and not necessarily in a particular project. I think we see a lot of this as saying, oh boy, this is 10 years of money in a particular project. And no, the rules are set for in the fund. And the notion of when this was set up is that there was going to be the ability for investment into funds, and then the fund could invest in projects, recapture that money, and then reinvest that money back in. Now, those rules are not real clear as of yet, but that's the idea, is that there can be movement in and out. And that's particularly important for investing in operating businesses, where that timeline may not be as long, different from real estate, which really is much more structured for a longer investment period. Another difference in this is the depth of the incentive. As you know from many of the tax credit programs, a lot of the repayment comes from the tax credits themselves. In this case, there is an incentive through the tax code, but that's not the primary source of repayment. This is, you're depending upon the risks and the rewards of the project in which you're investing in. So that's going to be a little bit different from some of the other tax credit programs. In terms of the last point about the outcomes, it's certainly the incentive of this program is, or the intent of the program is to spur development where it didn't occur otherwise. And it's certainly reasonable to see this as a way of catalyzing additional private money. A lot of that is done through the targeting of the communities. The Economic Innovation Group, which is really the initiated this project, really talks about the concentration of equity capital in the country and how this is a way to kind of spread out that equity across the country. That said, there are no requirements within the legislation as it is now that there's not a credit elsewhere test in this. So if any SBA lenders in here, you know you have a credit elsewhere test. There's not a test like that in the documents.
So let's just catch up a little bit. The designations are made, but I'll walk you real quick through how that process worked. So what the legislation said was that 25% of eligible tracts could be designated an opportunity zone. So every governor had so many tracts in their state that were eligible to be designated. He had to pick, and it was the governors who picked, and cities and counties and parishes who urged the governor to make certain choices. But 25% of what was eligible got selected. And you had to either have, and there were criteria, high poverty or low median incomes. So at the end of the day, 8,700 census tracts across the country have been designated as opportunity zones in this first round. And the goal of EIG, who David just mentioned, and others, is let's make this a success. Let's make that first round of opportunity zones go wild with investment. And I don't know if you tried to get designated census tracts that didn't get across the finish line. There could be opportunities to pull those in future rounds. That's all dependent, though, on whether or not this first round is, worth the investment, worth the time, and that's what we're going to figure out over the next couple of years is equity investment finding these communities. The majority of these places are urban, suburban, many rural as well. But if you look at the map, and I don't think I've got a map in here, but it's a checkerboard across the country with a lot of urban locations zeroed in on.
It's interesting, this designation of tracts. A couple of the think tanks have done some analysis of this. The Brookings Institution has done some analysis of which tracts were chosen and which not, and as well as the Urban Institute. And they really looked at the degree to which the designations were going to areas of the most need or not, and whether these were areas that were really starved for credit or whether these were areas that were already getting credit. Now, it's definitely a trade-off on this, that it's reasonable to assume that areas that are currently starved of credit probably don't have the infrastructure and don't have a lot of projects ready to go for investment, as opposed to areas where there are projects ready to go, there's an infrastructure ready to bring in other types of subsidies and so on, and deals can move relatively quickly. it's really going to be up to local government to kind of look at that and kind of level the playing field about getting investment into these areas that have not seen investment for a long time. Being able to put together deals, bring together those additional subsidies into the deal that can help make that deal work. And then in the areas where there is a lot of opportunity, I know there are certain areas where there's some concerns with gentrification as a result of opening up more investment. I know one of the areas that has been talked about is in Long Island, which was designated as an opportunity zone, and then Amazon announced that they're putting one of their new expansion headquarters in there, and they're saying this is gasoline on the fire. But again, that's a real role for local government here, is trying to help make sure that this is good development that's channeled into the plans and strategies of the community, and to kind of guard against some of the negative impacts in this. I've been really impressed by the level of planning here that's been going on.
So there are 3 primary benefits of the Opportunity Zone program. So let's understand each of these 3. And the first is a temporary tax deferral. And we'll walk through an example of this in a second that just pulls it all together. But the first is, if you put your money, that is, if you've got capital gains that is taxable, if you put it into an opportunity fund, you stop the clock on when that tax on the capital gains is due. So it's delayed. So it's the time value of money. That is a good thing for investors, and urging them to put the money into into an opportunity fund. It's either delayed until December 31st, 2026, or until you pull the money out of the opportunity fund. So the clock is ticking on that first benefit. The longer you wait, that benefit's going to mean less to you. So early in the program, this is important. The second is a step up in basis. And what this means is the longer you keep the money in an opportunity fund, and again, this is supposed to encourage long-term investment. If you keep it in there for 5 years, then that original capital gains gets knocked 10%. You only owe 90% of what you owed, not 100%. If you keep it in there 7 years, it's 15%. So you owe 85%, not 100%, when you reach either 2026 or whenever you pull the money out. And the last benefit is a permanent exclusion. And this is very, very attractive as well. If you're picking, low risk, high reward projects, you pull your money out of, say, the stock market, you've got capital gains due, you put it into an opportunity fund, and that fund invests in projects that go gangbusters. When you pull your money out of that opportunity fund, if you've kept it in there for the 10 years, you pay 0 taxes on the capital gains that you've made on that investment. So 3 layered incentives that should work together to get private investment interested in opportunity funds.
Yeah, and here's where that, we were talking about that hard stop on the, when you had to repay the taxes on the initial capital gain in 2026. This is where that really comes into play. You have to be able to get the 15% basis boost, that forgiveness of 15% of the amount that you'd have to pay a tax on. You have to have it invested in 7 years. After 2019, you are not going to, or 2009, excuse me, you are not going to have the 7 years to be able to do that. So after this year, you're going to lose that ability to have additional 5% of the basis boost. And 2 years from now, you're going to lose the additional 5 years. So the benefits are going to drop off unless the legislation changes.
So just an example, just so to make sure that we're all on the same page, and this is Mr. Monopoly. He's got $1 million, and it's capital gains that he owes money on. He finds an opportunity fund, he puts that $1 million into the opportunity fund, he's going to keep it there for 10 years. So he's going to get all the benefits because he's kept it there for 10 years. So in 2026, because he's kept it in there for 10 years, in 2026, that's what triggers the initial payment of capital gains of what he pulled out, out of the stock market. So he owes the money in 2026, but he's delayed it till 2026. Second, because he's kept it in there for more than 7 years, he doesn't owe all of what he owed, today. He owes 85% of what he owes today a bunch of years later. And finally, he invested in an opportunity fund. That opportunity invested in housing projects, again, that did very, very well. He pulls his money out of that opportunity fund in 10 years, 0 capital gains he has to pay on all the money he made in that investment. This is a good place just to pause, just to make sure that the basics we understand. Are we good?
Questions? Yeah.
So this cat, not only the $1 million, as an exclusion after 10 years, but let's say it's a hotel and he made an additional $5 million, and it went to the fund, he can't touch that though until 10 years, all right? Okay, so he pulls out $6 million, it has an exclusion.
Everything that he has made, it's excluded.
And he's already paid the tax on the initial $1 million. He's already paid the tax on the additional $1 million. Right.
Does the count on the 5 and 7 years start at the time he puts the money into the investment, or is it from the time they invest in the actual project, or from the time he puts the money in the fund?
It's the time that they put the money into the fund.
So they have 180 days in order to get their money into the fund. So the fund has 30 months in order to invest that money.
Yes, there are details. So there are fund requirements and there's, timelines that you have to hit. But by and large, yes.
So the fund can hold that. So I think the thing is as you're developing the project, you have a 30-month window for the fund to put that money in that fund.
So let's talk a little bit about the types of projects that are eligible for this kind of investment. So operating businesses, you can invest in a business operating in an opportunity zone. And what a lot of people are talking about is real estate. New projects either coming from the ground up or, you are rehabbing some vacant structure that sat in that census tract for 30 years and, you want to make something new of this. Now on real estate, and this is where a lot of the questions are coming into the IRS, particularly on the guidance that they released, you've got to meet a couple of tests, either original use, that's pretty easy if you are building something from the ground up, that is an original use considered, or substantial improvement. And the IRS is working to clarify what substantial improvement means. But basically, you need to take something that exists, and you need to, double the value of that particular asset. There are some exclusions in the legislation. Sin businesses, they don't want to see gambling parlors or liquor stores or massage parlors or what have you. But this. But housing.
How was your project?
Housing, hotels, light industry. I mean, this is a lot of opportunity for a lot of projects in the opportunity zones.
Yeah. There's really few guidelines here, at least explicitly on that. Although within the actual tax code, there are a lot of very particular guidelines, and that's, again, it's important to talk to a tax professional around looking at particular projects. They have a lot of highly technical tax-related terms that are important to understand and comply with. I do also want to say, in terms of the flexibility on this, is there are no statutory restrictions on stacking or twinning the opportunity zones incentives with other state or federal incentives or any of the other tax credits. So it is at least theoretically possible to twin the opportunity zones incentives with historic tax credits, with renewable tax credits, with new markets or low-income housing tax credits. I know I've talked to some people who said, yes, that's completely doable, and I've talked to other people who have said, well, I'm not sure how that's exactly going to work, so I will say that right now that's theoretical, although I do know some people who say they really know how to do it, and I trust their judgment on this, but I think we're going to see about that being figured out. But I think the thing is, this is open to be able to stack these different benefits for particular projects.
And beyond that, and I know that there's going to be a panel later, and Karen's going to talk some about this, but there are plenty of grant opportunities that are going to be attractive to opportunity zones. And you've got federal agencies who want to put brownfields money in opportunity zones. They want to put transportation infrastructure money into opportunity zones. They want to do water, sewer in opportunity zones. So if you've got projects that aren't quite yet ready and need some of that infrastructure investment, be chasing those dollars to make these projects more attractive with that better road, with that sewer hookup, with that, brownfield cleaned up. So this administration is valuing their opportunity zones and putting their money behind them as well as they're pushing monies out the door. So there are time limits once you create an opportunity fund. The question was, I think the question is, can you sit on monies in an opportunity fund to wait for a project to be ready for investment? And you've got to move monies from an opportunity fund into projects in a very short time frame. Right. So that money can't sit there and, it needs to find a project pretty soon.
Right.
Yeah, I think actually his question is, can the political subdivision create the opportunity fund? And I'm sort of curious, are there limits on who is able to create the fund, and is there a limitation on the investor having control over the fund? Or are we there yet?
In terms of the eligibility for an opportunity fund, you have to be a taxpayer because, of course, this is a tax incentive. And the IRS has a form out now. It's basically a self-certification. So there are not a lot of restrictions on that. There are self-dealing restrictions. I can't say that I'm completely fluent in those, but there are self-dealing restrictions within that.
And we'll talk in a couple of slides where these funds are going to sit, but they're going to sit at the local level in a lot of places to do local projects. So that is certainly an opportunity for these funds. Key players, and I'm just kind of curious in this room, I know we've got some overflow rooms, and you can raise your hands in the overflow rooms, but I won't see them. There's a lot of folks who need to be at the table with an opportunity fund discussion. How many folks here represent local government? Separate economic development agencies? Developers? Tax experts?
All right.
Financial advisors? Investors? Banks? Fund managers? All right. So this guy's got the fund money for your projects. So this is, and you can see if you're watching the hands raised, there are a lot of players that are interested in this tool, and you should all be talking to each other just because you can get these projects working together, across the finish lines that you want for these projects. The cities should be talking to the bankers, and the tax experts should be talking to the investors, and we'll talk later about how to make that really happen in your community.
Yeah. Just a couple of comments on the investors. Again, coming from this perspective of a lot of the existing community development tax credits, this is expected to see a little broader, or actually a much broader set of investors than some of the community development tax credits. The Economic Innovation Group estimated that there are $6 trillion in unrealized capital gains. There's no expectation that all of that money is going to come into this, I've seen estimations of between 30 billion and 100 billion over the 10 years of this legislation. I guess we'll see what this is. And it's helpful to understand that we're talking about people with capital gains, and probably pretty substantial capital gains. And that's, I mean, it's going to be difficult to understand exactly how large that is. I'm hesitating for a moment because I have a couple of statistics here, and I'm not sure that either one of them are helpful. The other thing to understand about the investors, though, is that investors are going to come with different motivations. Some investors are going to be really trying to understand this idea of risk and return, and that return is going to be their main motivation for making investments. We are expecting that there are going to be socially conscious investors that are not only going to be looking at that return, but also going to be looking at the social impacts of the investments that are happening, and that's important to understand. And it's also important to understand that certain investors are going to have very geographical interests. They're going to have a connection to a particular town or a particular region or a particular type of background, and that's going to be some motivation. So as you're looking at investors, it's important to understand that these investors are going to have different interests. We do anticipate that banks are going to be involved in the Opportunity Zone program. We've actually seen that involvement already. But they're going to be involved in different ways. Certainly they can be investors, and we've seen banks as investors already. Banks are not going to be as big as investors probably as they are in some of the other tax credits, just because banks do not normally have capital gains. Most banks don't. Some banks do because of their type of business. For the most part, in the general business of banking, there's not a lot of capital gains that are generated. So the investment side is not going to be as strong. We do see them taking a role as managers of opportunity funds. The banks are well positioned to do that, particularly with their knowledge of the local communities as they're working through their community development strategies and their CRA responsibilities. And we also see lenders as being involved, or banks being involved as lenders in the transactions. These transactions, the opportunity funds are, of course, opportunity zones are, of course, equity, but these deals are going to require debt, and banks are a good source of the debt. So it's going to be important to see the banks as partners in these projects as you go along.
So let's talk a little bit about opportunity funds themselves. So we've talked about the opportunity zones, and this is where the projects or the businesses sit. Let's talk about the opportunity funds. This is where the investment money is going to go. And this is the investment vehicle. This is what investors put their monies into. These will be managed by fund managers, and these fund managers will look for, high reward, low risk projects to invest equity in. As a fund manager, you've got to put 90% of your opportunity fund dollars into eligible projects, and largely these are going to be development from the ground up, or substantially improving existing properties, as well as investing in operating businesses. And again, this is considered equity and not debt. So the people who are doing these projects, the developers, are going to want an equity partner. That's what they're going to have to get their head around. This is not a grant. This is not a loan. This is somebody coming in as an equity partner to participate in your project.
Yeah, the funds are going to be very important in this. These are the guys that are going to be bringing together the investors and the projects. So they have to have knowledge of both, and they have to have the ability to structure deals. So they're the kind of glue that's holding this together.
And a question earlier, I think about just, can a local government put together one of these funds? And David talked about this. You're going to see these funds sitting everywhere. There are already big national funds that are coming together that are going to be looking for big projects. So there is an opportunity to go to, the big banks and the big funds to figure out if your projects are attractive to them. There are going to be state and regional funds. And I don't know if there are any. Is your fund focused on any particular region?
Yes, we're currently focused
Yep.
in order to make those investments in the health system.
But as these funds come together, you're going to find some that are interested in particular states and regions, a little broader. You're going to find local funds that we just heard that are pulling together investors who want to do something with their money good in their hometown with projects that they can see, rising down the street. So that is an opportunity. And you're going to find some funds that just get to put together for particular projects. And as David alluded to as well, you're going to have some funds that are interested in veteran-owned businesses. You're going to have some funds that are interested in supporting women. You're going to have some funds that are doing very, very narrow investing. So there's going to be a lot of different ways to slice this.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of some of the early funds that have been starting up, and they've had specific expertise around things like affordable housing or funding operating businesses with growth potential. We've seen funds starting with expertise around certain tax credits and figuring out how we can take how we can use those tax credits and labor on the opportunity zones. We've seen knowledge of certain very specific types of geographies. There's a fund that's specific to Indian country. There's a fund that's looking at regenerating small towns in the southeast. So very, very specific niches people are looking at in terms of the different kinds of
Quick question, or two
Yes, sir.
quick questions. First, substantially improve existing property. If you can help define substantially improve, that would be very helpful. And then the second is this an opportunity when you form the fund to use it as a tool for economic development, attraction, and retention of companies?
On the substantial improvement test, and again, IRS is defining this just because it's been asked a million questions about what that particular test means. But as they define it, and it's been a couple of months since I've looked at this, but as I recall, and Jesse, you can help me on this as well, you're taking a look at the value of the property and you are doubling it. If you can show that that value has doubled, then you pass the substantial improvement test.
I've got a little bit different take. I think it's much grayer than we know right now. And anybody that's been involved in a real estate project knows that there's a lot of due diligence, a lot of steps, a lot of process, even before you get to breaking ground. And you know whether you're making progress or not. And so substantial progress, I'm kind of reading it as very wide open. As long as you have your development plans, you're getting architectural drawings, you're getting your funding lined up. As long as you're making that progress towards breaking ground.
We've been advised that it's a 51% or more improvement of the property, excluding the length.
Yes.
And it has to happen within a very limited amount. This is for projects that are ready to go.
Value of the land. So if you have $1 million property excluding the land, you have to put $510,000 into it to show substantial improvement. But we're really waiting for those final rules and regs to say, what does substantial improvement mean? Because we submitted some questions, say, hey, we'd really like to see it be 25%. Right?
Yeah, and again, we're getting into the details of the tax rules that we want to avoid. But I understand. But there is a substantial improvement that has to occur on that.
And among the questions that I think IRS has received, I think it's around substantial improvement that they need to define that a little more clearly for folks to be able to run with.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Take your wife to Washington on Valentine's Day, and you can attend the IRS session.
My understanding of the substantial improvement was that it was 100% of the adjusted basis.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
yeah.
Of the
And
building.
then, exactly, and then you're excluding the land values.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
This is consistent with the, over here.
Okay.
This is consistent with the Stafford Act implementation from FEMA on disaster recovery.
Okay.
That's when certain federal guidelines kick in on this definition of substantial improvement. and it is the value of the property from where you had it to where you're bringing it.
Yep. So a lot of folks are freaking out about where these funds exist. So I've included a couple of links where some folks are starting to gather, dozens of funds that are already up and running. And again, these slides will be available, and these will be updated, I'm sure, as the funds go online. But there's a lot of opportunity out there. You just need to know where it is. These are just a couple of good resources to figure out what funds are out there, and they define what they're looking at. Is it a national fund? Is it a regional fund? Does it have a particular focus? So you look at these, you figure out, all right, these guys might be very interested in me and my project. I need to talk to these folks. And they've got contacts, and these people want to talk to you.
I just want to say about these two sources that there is no official source of all these funds. Like, you register with the IRS, but the IRS is not publishing, here's everybody who's registered with us. These are surveys that you're doing. They will be continually updated. They are probably not going to have 100%. If you have your own fund, I would suggest that you contact these sources so you can get out there so they can attract investors.
And a question we got, just what if your fund doesn't do well? Is that a risk? And yes. Yep. You're investing in a vehicle that, you want to do well, but if it doesn't, you lose money. So fund managers are going to look for projects that make a lot of sense, that maybe didn't pencil out without the incentive, but with the incentive, this is a good project. We're ready to go on this particular investment now.
Yeah. So I want to talk for a minute about bank investment in opportunity funds. I mentioned previously that banks can participate in a number of ways: as an investor, as a fund manager, or a lender. In any of those roles, there are certain regulatory issues. So I just want to go over a couple of those. When a bank makes an investment into a fund, they're generally doing that with something called a public welfare investment. To do that, the investment must primarily benefit either low-income individuals, low-income geographies, or areas targeted by a government for redevelopment. They can also meet this test if the project meets the definition of a qualified investment under the Community Reinvestment Act, which is something I'm going to talk about in a minute. What we've seen to date is that banks making investments in opportunity funds, which they've also managed, and those opportunity funds are generally set up as a limited liability company or a limited partnership. And that shields the bank from unlimited liability, which is a requirement of the Public Welfare Authority. I do want to say that investments in opportunity funds do not automatically qualify under the Public Welfare Investment Authority. We advise national banks and federal savings associations to discuss their participation in the program with the OCC prior to making an investment in a fund. The next slide, please. We've got a lot of questions about whether or not participation qualifies under the Community Reinvestment Act. The short answer to that is it could. The current CRA Q&As were done prior to the creation of the Opportunity Zone program, so they're not mentioned in the Q&As. Generally, what we've seen is that there is no automatic CRA consideration for participation in a project funded with Opportunity Zone funds. We look at the underlying project and to see whether that meets the definition of community development, which is defined here, and that it has the geographic requirements for consideration, meaning that it's in the bank's assessment area or it's in the larger state and regional area that includes the bank assessment area. For those of you who look understanding the definition of community development, it generally means affordable housing, services to low and moderate income individuals, economic development by financing small farms and small businesses, and revitalizing and stabilizing certain geographies. We have, like I said, we have been asked quite a bit about this question of whether or not there will be, how this will be considered going forward. As many of you know, last fall, the OCC issued an advance notice of proposed rulemaking that solicited ideas from the public on how to strengthen the CRA framework. We received over 1,500 comment letters, and several of those that specifically requested clarification around investments and participation in the newly authorized opportunity funds. Those comments are being taken into consideration in the development of a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, or NPR. When that NPR is issued, and I don't have a timeline for that, the public will have another opportunity to submit comments before a final rule on that is issued. As I mentioned previously, we have seen interest on this, and I wanted to give you an idea of some of the examples of projects that are being done through this. These projects have been part of the bank's community and economic development strategies. Given a short time frame of being able to make these investments, these are deals that they've been familiar with. They are people that they're familiar with, and as I said, they're using their knowledge of the community and the different funding sources and being able to put together deals. You can also see they're primarily real estate deals at this time. We expect, as the rules become clearer over time, that there's going to be a larger variation in terms of some of the types of projects that are done.
So let's talk about things that you know, post this summit, some things that you should be working on in your region. One is, we talked and we had all those different players who should be at the table, and all of those folks, you should start to begin conversations, and someone should lead that conversation to gather those folks. You should begin identifying what projects are the most ready to go. You've got census tracts, you've got places in them that are further along than most, and you should be prioritizing which projects as a community you think are ready for investment, that are ripe for a conversation with an opportunity fund manager. You should be looking to figure out which of your developers and people who are looking to get these projects off the dime are looking for equity partners, and making sure that they understand what they're getting into with an opportunity zone investment. And you should figure out, and I gave you a couple of lists of where those opportunity funds sit and what they are interested in, but you should be looking at your matches. These are good matches for me just because I've got a project that ticks off a lot of what they're looking for. If they're looking for housing, if they're looking for this or that, or in this particular region, I need to be focused on that particular opportunity fund. So some things to do up front. Map your census tract. Identify on maps where you've got potential projects in those opportunity zones. Put those maps online, promote them. Engage with developers, and you're doing this in a great way today, but continue this conversation and figure out what projects within opportunity zones they're working on and whether or not they want to seek opportunity fund investment for that. Keep in touch with your state. If this is the first round of this, a lot of governors, when they made their designations initially, didn't know what they were doing. They had a month or two to figure out where the census tracts were in their state that were even eligible, and didn't know which of those census tracts really were ready for investment. I think everyone's going to have a much better understanding of this program if there is a round two, and to figure out how to build on that. So as a community, keep in touch with your state office. Let them know that you are doing very good things in your opportunity zone, and that there are some contiguous tracts or tracts on the other side of town that you'd love to see included if there is a second round.
Yeah, that's hard to.
When might there be a second round? So the folks that designed this program are watching this program, and this is the Economic Innovation Group and others to let. Was there a program on? Oh, 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if it is doing well, then there will be a push to do more of this. And talk to your legislators. Keep them informed of what's going on in your opportunity zones. It's a congressional act that put this, into play. And if they see that this is working for them, they'll want to do more of this. So there's no time frame for when it might happen, but the sooner it's a success, the sooner it's going to see a round two.
And it's important to understand that there is no mechanism right now for collecting the information about what investments have been made and what impact they have. That's up to you all to do that, to collate that, and make sure that gets to the right people.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
I love everything that's taking place here. The concern that I have and the parents that I represent is that the opportunity zone is mostly in the city. And where we're trying to increase the growth is at the Port of Iberia and the airport. Is not included in the opportunity zone. And that's going to create a big problem. We're going to do everything we can in the city, and we do have some opportunities. But for big growth, we have investors that's going to invest because they're planning on doing it now.
Yeah.
But they won't have the incentives.
And I'm finding in some states they did it wrong. They picked the wrong places, and if they had to do it again, they picked different places. Keep them informed of why they should have picked the place that you're urging that might get picked in the next round, and show them the opportunity there.
And I just want to highlight from the last slide, I think another important group to make sure that you have engaged in this is your banks. Like I said, they have connections into the development community. They have the connections into finance. They are excellent partners in this process. Engage them early.
Prospectus materials, and this is something that communities do, across the country. Focus some prospectus materials on your opportunity zones. Jesse and I are working in Casper, Wyoming. We're putting together some slide decks for them that really showcase why an investor would be interested, number one, in Casper, Wyoming, and giving all the economic benefits for why those dollars would do well in this place, but also showcasing those projects that are ripe opportunities, low risk, high reward, and providing a lot of information to them so that they can look at this and say, I'm interested, let's talk. So put together those materials and start putting them in the hands of opportunity fund managers. Build relationships, build a team in your community with all the folks that I mentioned, and have somebody organize that team and start meeting. We've working with communities and they're doing tours of projects. They're pulling in folks and showing them on the ground, this is what we've got. And, organize that in your particular community. Get the feeling of your banks across the region to figure out if they're going to play with you. They will be certainly interested in this program, and you ought to be having those conversations with financial institutions. And again, the opportunity fund managers, they've all got a phone, they've all got an email. They are waiting for you to contact them. They're looking for projects, but they're expecting that projects are going to get dumped in their lap. And they're kind of in the catbird seat now in that there aren't a ton of opportunity funds that are making investments. So, if you've got a great project, they are ready to get started. So drop it in their lap and get them interested. Question here.
Is there a list, central database for these opportunity fund managers?
In the couple of links that I sent earlier, they do identify them by name. And again, those lists are going to grow. There's no official list. It's just some organizations out there that understand that everyone is looking for that list, and they're doing the best that they can to compile what they know. And I think that there's going to be more of those lists that do emerge. But two of those, the two I saw and linked, were fantastic.
Right. Yeah, I was actually talking with the folks at the National Council for State Housing Agencies, one of the groups that are compiling their list, and they expect their list to double within the next month. So these are really fast changing as they're going on, but they're a good resource.
We've got a whole panel later on leveraging finance, or leveraging opportunity zones, you'll talk more about this later, but federal grants, state grants, get all of those that you can, just because these are ripe for that kind of investment. Again, keep your governor's office in the loop and let him know that you are taking this opportunity zone to the next level and doing it better than anywhere else in the state, and this is where he should be focusing his investment. And again, if you've got census tracts that just didn't make the cut this time, or if you figured out that you've got a contiguous census tract that didn't make a lot of sense previously, but heck, if there is a second round, I want that included in the mix. Start making the case for those census tracts now too. You're not too early to think about the future of this program.
Yeah.
Question?
As participants, will we have access to your slide presentation?
Yes, we'll list them on we'll put them on our website.
They're going to be on the website later.
Right.
Well, okay.
Is there a reason to go with an established fund opposed to establishing your own project-specific fund?
It's a good question. The question is, chase a fund or create a fund? And it depends. If you've got plenty of investors that you know can, shake loose the tree and put some of those monies into a local fund, then it might make sense to create a local fund. But in a lot of places, rather than developing project ideas, they are thinking about creating funds. In the absence of, all right, we've got finally interest in somebody putting their money into something, what are we going to invest in now? So in the absence of just obvious investors that are ready to do this, I'd recommend that there are going to be funds out there and plenty of funds out there. Make sure that you've got projects that are worthy of investment before you've got funds that are ready to invest.
I'd like to approach that maybe a little differently. I think in a lot of the community development tax credits, a lot of the funds are set up so that they're very specific to the deal, particularly since a lot of them are real estate. The idea, or at least the initial conception of this, but these were a lot of multi-investor funds that were going to have multi-projects. The rules of the program allow it to go either way, and I think how that works is going to depend upon, one is kind of the establishment of how folks work with the program going forward, and some of the risks and rewards. So it's difficult to answer that question definitively without understanding the deal and all the parts of that. But I think the customs and habits of the program are going to be formed over time. Yes, sir.
On this particular question, one perspective we had. On this particular question, I deal with a co-funding source, and what we found specifically for the St. Bernard Hospital Service District in establishing a hospital in St. Bernard Parish, they did create a single-purpose CDE for the purposes of a new market tax credit structure, and we found that it made the deal much leaner than if there was more money to put into the project than we were finding in other deals were going to the CDE transaction costs. So that was a benefit to the program there, but they were ready to go with a specific project, and they knew where their funding sources were coming from.
Yeah. Are you twinning that with the new markets and the opportunity zones?
We were a leveraged lender. We used CDBG funds as a leveraged loan source into the project. And so we're investigating here what the leveraging opportunities might be.
I think we've got 1 or 2 minutes left. Just some slides of resources. These are good places just to keep up to date with what's happening with the program. Again, these slides are going to be available up on the website. And just some contact information if you want to contact David or I after the fact. So do we have 1 or 2 minutes for questions?
Has there been any conversation or discussion or examples on how the end user may realize some of the benefits? It seems like it's very heavy in construction, which we have many programs that have done that. But has there been any discussion on how this is innovative and how the end users of these projects somehow benefit in wage increases and
And the
housing, rent.
by
pay
end users, the
decreases.
community itself?
Yes.
Okay. So I urge everyone, and we had a community that we were working with that was scared of this program just because they don't manage their development well. And they knew if they unlocked this and got census tracts designated in their community, that they would face gentrification, that they would get community pushback, that they would, so they didn't chase this just because they weren't ready to shape this. And I would suggest that along the way, the government, the community needs to be part of the conversation and to make sure that it is seeing the benefits out of this that it wants to see, that it is pushing the kinds of projects that it wants to have grow in their community. So they need to be a part of the early conversation. Otherwise, this is going to happen, it could happen to communities rather than with communities.
Can I say that, just a comment, that in our community, in Monroe, Louisiana, we had the best mayor and the best council, and they put the opportunity zone and picked the area, and I'm the executive director of the Southside Economic Development, and everyone worked together, and we got exactly, I think we put in 7, we got 4. And so we got exactly in the governor's office and our state senator, Francis Thompson. It was a wonderful process, and I think it's going to be very successful because we got exactly what we wanted. And so now we're working to try to get, a couple of hotels done, and so we're looking for funding on those, but we're marrying them with new market tax credits.
Yeah, and exactly. And don't take the back seat now. Stay in the front seat and make sure that it is achieving what you want it to achieve.
And I just say that, that's an excellent point to end this on, is that the benefits that you want to have to your end users are going to be largely dependent upon your ability as local governments to make sure that you get the right projects out there and you're managing those projects effectively. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.